Hi guys, this is Doug Slocum, Synthetic Sound Labs. There have been numerous questions about the functionality of the V-Gates, so today I want to just show you and run through very quickly what the V-Gates does at sort of a sterile technical level, but it'll give you a bit, an idea of how all the modes and functions work. It's difficult to explain in a paper manual. So this is the V-Gates. It has analog and digital modes, and depending on which of the analog or digital you're in, it has different functions within that. It has an initial control for, well, we'll see that later, and a CV amount control. It has 8 gate outputs, which are very flexible, and there's an LED associated with each one. There's, again, depending on what mode you're in, we've got a reset or CV input and a clock in output. We'll see how those work in a moment. When you first power up your system, you'll see the V-Gates lights flash up and down a couple of times, and then what it'll do is it'll display the firmware version that's currently loaded. In this particular case, it'll be 2.1, and it'll flash that twice. So, flash 2.1, 2.1. Okay, what's it good for? Let's take analog first. One of my favorites. Let's take a CV in and connect it to a low frequency oscillator, the quad LFO. In this particular mode, we're in analog mode. The down is slope. We also have step and binary. So we're in analog. Let's show you slope first. Now manually, I bring up the initial knob, and we've got essentially a bar graph. In step mode, now only one is on at a time. Now I'll add here that the clock input-output, right now for every state change, you get a 1 millisecond output from here. Today, I won't demonstrate and play with that triggering on. If I set it up about here with a sine wave, and you can see the approximate frequency, I'm going to change the CV amount so that we now have sort of a bouncing ball at sine wave. You can feed any waveform into this. Triangle wave is more linear. Sawtooth wave is fine. Sine is one of my favorites. And you can control the starting point, the end point, how much you want of it, or how much you want below it. Okay, you can also, since we've seen the slope, we've seen the step, you've also got a binary. I'll slow it down a little bit. So that's analog. Let's reset right now, and we will take a look at digital mode. So, reset, we're going to go into digital mode, and we're going to go into random. What was slope in analog mode is random mode. And I'm going to flip to a square wave here, so I've got a nice clean edge, although it's not really necessary, at least in many cases. The clock output that was in analog is now a clock input. So every input now is going to cause a random change in the outputs. You'll notice that only one is on at a time. As I bring this up to just be above 5, you'll notice that now you can have any number of random outputs on. And what happens in between? Notice what happens if I bring it about a quarter of the way down. The bottom 4 can be any number of outputs, whereas the top 4 or so will only be one at a time. Difficult to see. And as you bring it up and down, you control essentially that transition is where between and exclusivity, basically all on random. Okay, now let's go to mode. Step mode's also interesting. You'll notice that the V-gates is now following the input pulse in step mode. Now go back. Now you might be thinking, what happens on the other side of that initial knob? Notice that the quad LFO has a 50-50 duty cycle for the square wave. If I move it over on this side, you'll notice that same progression of lights happening again, but now notice that it follows the pulse width of the quad LFO, which happens to be 50-50. It'll follow virtually, and again, as we move it up, you'll get that exclusivity, again, following the pulse width, or how many of the output channels do you want to be non-exclusive, and that's all controlled in the dial. We'll move over to step mode. You'll notice that it's pretty much a gate sequencer, and you'll notice in this, with the knob all the way down, it is following the pulse width. As you bring the knob up, more and more stages do not follow the pulse width. It's a little bit backwards from the way that the random worked, but it's something you'll get used to. It felt better when I was designing the firm. Again, as you bring this down to the middle, follow pulse wave, not follow pulse wave, or input pulse rather. As I bring this more and more past 5, you'll get it to a point where now it's going to do a ping pong. And as I bring it further up, you'll get that same effect where it's now following the pulse wave. I want a step sequencer that will reset on 4. Take the output of 5, one above it, and feed it in, and now you'll get 1, 2, 3, and 4. Similarly, I want to count in 5, or I can count in 7, 8 if you want. And similarly, everything's the same here. You can also do the up down. It switches after the jack is in. There is also a binary mode for division. So we go to binary now. Again, between following and not following. Here's not following, and here's all channels following the input pulse width. All right, I think that pretty well does it for the V-gates. Thanks for watching. If you have any other questions, by all means, contact me. But I hope this has given you a little bit of background as to how it works, and go off and wiggle with this thing. Experiment to your heart's content.